Just thought I'd see what happened. Thank you all for coming and welcome. We have a wonderful, wonderful program, a wonderful, wonderful speaker tonight. I know you will love him. I do have a few announcements to make before we get started this evening. If you look at the back of your program, you will see that the rest of our semester is jam-packed with some great programs still to come. Coming up on Sunday, Dr. Barbara Ballard is doing her ongoing Women Running for Office series, which has been very successful. On Thursday, November 9th, Edward Humes, another Pulitzer-prize winning author and journalist over here, how the GI Bill transformed the American dream. He will talk about how the transformational process that occurred after the GI Bill was enacted. And as part of our Veterans Day tribute, also then the next day on Friday the 10th, our tribute to veterans. In the afternoon at 2 p.m., retired Navy Captain Buck Newsome. It is free and open to the public. Please come. On Tuesday, the 14th, we have a late addition to our programming for the fall semester. Brian Atwood, who was President Clinton's administrator for the United States Agency for International Development, knows everything there is to know for many, many years on international development and the crisis occurring in developing nations around the world. We're imposing on him to specifically focus on some areas in Africa, Rwanda, Darfur, that are of critical importance these days. On the 16th, Daryl Hart, who's going to have a little bit of a program that may be a little bit counter to what you might think. He's a conservative, but his program, Why the Romance Between the Religious Right and American Conservatism May Be Over, is going to be an extremely interesting take on what's happening in politics today. And finally, another late addition, and we can thank Scott Richardson for bringing all these people tonight. Richard Ben Cramer, Brian Atwood, and now Mark Halpern on Wednesday, December 6th. He is the political director of ABC News and the author of a brand new book that's coming out called The Way to Win, Taking the White House in 2008. So I hope you all will come to those as well. We have a couple of other announcements tonight. We want to mention once again our policy on question and answer, where and Bill does this so much better than I, but please don't filibuster. If you've got a question to ask, please ask the question. We've got about a 10-second attention span, and unless it's a compliment, then it'll go to probably 20 seconds. Immediately after this evening's program, Richard Ben Cramer will have a book signing in the back of the hall, so please buy his book and come and have him sign it. And now I would like to introduce our wonderful director of the Dole Institute of Politics to introduce our evening speaker, Mr. Bill Lacey.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thanks to all of you, and let me issue a special thanks again this week to Scott Richardson, our Republican fellow. Scott, where are you sitting? Wave at everybody. Let's thank Scott. He helped us get Richard here tonight. You know, our speaker tonight has impeccable and incredible credentials. He won the Pulitzer-prize in 1979 for his reporting from the front lines of Israel's invasion of Lebanon. His work has appeared in a number of prominent publications like Time, the New York Times, magazine, I should say, Newsweek, Esquire, and Rolling Stone. He has written books about Israel and about baseball stars Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams, and is currently working on a book about Yankees baseball superstar A-Rod, Alex Rodriguez. He holds a bachelor degree from Johns Hopkins and a master's from the Columbia School of Journalism, and resides in beautiful Chestertown on the eastern shore of Maryland. What brings him here tonight, though, is a work that was named one of the 100 best works of U.S. journalism in the last century. What It Takes is a stunning work. Its scope is enormous. It takes a hard look in detail at the key 1988 candidates for president. What It Takes is unique among the many volumes on presidential campaigns that focus on process, organizing, polling, message, the horse race issues. What It Takes focuses a laser beam right at the character of the individual seeking the highest office in the land, illuminating both their strengths and their failings. It should come as no surprise that one of the featured individuals in the book, Senator Joe Biden, spoke of the importance of what it takes when he appeared at the Dole Institute just last fall. I hope that many of you who have read it, and I saw a lot of first edition books here tonight. I have mine with me. But I hope that most of you read it, or if you haven't read it, that you'll pick up a copy tonight or later and do read it, for it really charts an important course, a way to measure, one might say, the character of the men and women who will seek the presidency in 2008. But Richard Ben Cramer's work goes well beyond even this. It is easily the most accurate portrait of Senator Bob Dole ever painted. He captures the senator's speech patterns and cadence as well as his mannerisms. There are a number of individuals present tonight. There are actually 5 individuals who were on the staff of the 88 campaign, and a number of the rest of you have been involved with Bob Dole during his long and illustrious career. But I think all of us would agree that Richard truly captured Bob Dole's character, his incredible determination, spirit, and heart. Please welcome Richard Ben Cramer.
Hi. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you, Bill, for a very generous introduction. I was tempted to come out and in the best Dole manner say, how we doing? What's cooking? How we looking? But, you know, after that introduction, I decided I was going to have to try to be respectable. So I will talk to you for a little bit about the making of that book, what it takes, and about the larger issues of covering presidential politics, covering potential presidents, nominees. And then what I'd like to do is open this up to questions, because you know what you want to talk about, and I don't. So, not being a lecturer by habit, I'll confine my remarks to a short time. I got my speech all written out here on a little bitty piece of paper. But I know where it starts. It starts with the story of Bob Dole. As Bill mentioned, there are many of you who've been involved with Dole over the years, but I venture to say that you don't know what made him, where he came from, unless you happen to be from Russell. And there's a lesson in that, which I'll get to. But let me tell you a little bit about the man, or some of the things that I found out. Bob Dole was the biggest, strongest, handsomest kid that had ever come out of Russell, Kansas. As a matter of fact, his female classmates had voted him the ideal boy. He was about 6 feet and change, about 194 pounds. He was the kind of kid who ran everywhere. He didn't walk. He ran, and he would lift cinder blocks in the backyard just to make himself harder. He was a force under the basket for the Russell High basketball squad. He was a kid who measured himself by his body, by his strength. And when he came home from the war, having been shot up in the campaign to march up the spine of Italy, he was not just wounded. He was a wreck. He was maybe half his previous weight. He was in a full body cast. In fact, the other boys on the train, on the troop train coming home, had used Dole's body cast as an ashtray to stub out their cigarettes in the train compartment. Buying a Dole, his mom had to pick these cigarettes out of his body cast. He couldn't stand how he smelled. He couldn't stand the way he was. He didn't know whether or not he even wanted to live. And from that low point, in a 5-year hegira of hospitals and operations and doctors and therapists and close to death 3 or 4 times, he hauled himself up to the point where he could make a new life. But that was the problem. He had to reinvent himself. He was no longer that big, smart, handsome boy. He felt himself to be walking wounded. And the act of will that was recreating himself to use what he did have left was what really defined Dole. You know, people in Washington used to talk about him as some kind of superhuman, supernatural force. He never stopped working. He never stopped moving. He never stopped thinking. He had no rest. He had no discernible hobbies. He had, he was, even for that town, which, is, to my way of thinking, a little short on enjoyment, he was notable. But they didn't understand where it came from. They had no idea. They thought he was mean. He wasn't mean. He was running as hard as he could, trying to get back to that feeling that he'd had of being whole. And this is why I tell you all this stuff, which may have been known to you. But the astonishing thing was that nobody in Washington knew this. Nobody in any part of the country knew this. Bob Dole himself had never told this story. In fact, his entire adult life had been spent more or less hiding the fact that anything had ever happened to him. His whole idea was nobody should ever have to vote for him because they felt sorry for him. And if anybody ever did feel sorry for him, Dole felt terrible. So he had buried this story. He had cut himself off from the life before that injury, and in fact the recovery from that injury. And the folks in Washington, certainly they never heard him talk about it, but they never heard anybody talk about it. And this brings us to how politics is covered in this country. A billion words were written about Bob Dole over the course of his career. And very smart reporters who had got to Washington because they were very smart reporters essayed profiles of Dole. But who did they ask about Dole? They asked who they always asked about everything that they wrote about, which is their lunch buddies. You want to know about Dole, so you call up Norm Ornstein at the American Enterprise Incident, and Norm will give you a good quote. That's Norm's business. He makes a very nice living giving good quotes. He's a good guy. I'd go to lunch with him. But he didn't know Bob Dole. He'd heard Bob Dole speak. He'd been at a lot of dinners where Bob Dole was up at the head table. He might have even, made a talk where Dole was in the audience, and maybe Dole asked him a question. Did he ever go to Russell, Kansas? You can bet Norm Ornstein never went to Russell, Kansas. I'm not just picking on Norm. I mean, they ask the usual suspects in Washington, what do you think about Dole? What do you know about Bob Dole? And as a consequence, about Bob Dole, as about every subject, they end up knowing pretty much what everybody else knows. And everybody knows it at the same time. And it's always wrong. Well, in my view, this is one of the big reasons, maybe the number one reason, why politicians in this country are ranked with used car salesmen more or less near the bottom of the charts. Because nobody ever writes anything real about them. I mean, the idea that I, some woolly-headed reporter who had no Washington experience, could come into the 1988 campaign and write 1,000 pages that was entirely new to the reader after those billions and billions of words had been written during the campaign. There's something fundamentally wrong about that. What were those billions of words about? They weren't about the candidates who wanted to be president. As Bill mentioned, they were about the polling, or they were about the ad campaigns, or they were about the consultants, or they were about the direct mail campaign or the fundraising. They wouldn't know a true fact about Bob Dole if it fell out of the sky on their heads. You know, let me tell you a story. This is not about Dole. This is about Gephardt, who was also in that election race, and a couple of, you know, whatever happened to that guy? Anyway, Gephardt is a very good fellow and comes from a lovely family. I knew his mom very well, and early on in my research about him, my researcher and I went out to Long Island to take his brother out to dinner. He has one brother, one sibling of any sort, and that is this brother, Don Gephardt. He was a professor at, I think, Stony Brook at the time. So anyway, we drove out to Long Island and took Don and his wife out to dinner, and we had a lovely time, and I had a big talk about the family and such. And then we were driving back to Don's house to go see the photo album, the family photo album. This is pure gold. So just to keep the conversational ball rolling, I say in the car, I say, well, Don, have you been besieged by interview requests and such? Because God knows Gephardt was a big candidate. He's about to win Iowa. Every paper in the country had to write a profile of Gephardt. And Don Gephardt told me, he said, the Long Island Bureau of the New York Times called up. They kind of wanted a jump in case Dick came to visit. But other than that, that's been about it. Now, there are 1,000 reporters doing Gephardt stories, and nobody has called his brother. This is not rocket science. But in Washington, what you hear, if you suggest, well, maybe you could call his mom, you know, people in Washington will say, well, what's she going to say? She's his mother. She's only going to say something nice. Which, you know, we wouldn't want to hear that, would we? So there was this vast open field for me to, you know, pretend I was running in, because nobody else was doing the story I was doing. I was doing the story about the candidates, and nobody else was doing that story. It was astonishing. And it is only worse today. We're 20 years down the road, and newspaper coverage has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk as the revenues for newspapers have shrunk, largely replaced, at least you know, in the public mind, by 24-hour television news. Now, I don't know if you've ever had the misfortune to watch 24 hours of CNN or MSNBC or Fox. But at the end of it, you have no more brain cells at all. 24 hours of that stuff will just about kill you. They don't talk about anything, but they do talk. They talk around the clock about nothing. If there's a child missing in Montana, that's good for an hour and a half. You know, about anything that's serious, it's all shout fests. It's all like, so you get somebody with a point of view, and then you ask somebody else in who's got what seems to be the opposite point of view, and then one will shout at the other. Usually the host shouts at his own guests. I always like that in a host. You know, I just don't get it. Anyway, the sum total of our knowledge has actually diminished. I didn't think it was possible, but there you have it. So if anybody wants to do a book about the candidates in 2008, I think they ought to get out there because, you know, there's no competition. You can, you can do great. Anyway, what we are presented with, I'm stealing from my own self at dinner now. We had dinner with the nabobs in the back room here. I thought you were all invited. I tried to get you in there, but anyway, as I told the nabobs, you know, what we see of these guys is they're this little guy in a suit on TV. My screen is about yay big. So the guy is more or less like this. And he's saying stuff that somebody else wrote for him. And he isn't saying it particularly well. I mean, they're not actors. And no wonder he looks like an idiot. No, you know, no wonder we revile them. This is supplemented by no actual knowledge of how it is that the person got to the point where they actually thought they could be president. Let me tell you something about these guys. When you get up close to these guys, and I'm talking about Republicans and Democrats, and everybody who gets to the point where they are a credible candidate for president, they are big, imposing, charming, intelligent winners. Every one of these guys, if you knew them, if you happened to be living next to them or something, you'd be telling all your friends, you got to meet this guy. This guy is fantastic. They have been winners every step of their lives. They have been, I'll tell you, it's no fun being their brother or sister. They suck up every bit of sunshine in the house. You know, we wonder why they all seem to have an idiot brother somewhere. You know, remember Reagan's idiot brother and Carter's idiot brother? Bush, I think, you know, maybe Neil qualifies. It's because nobody else gets any oxygen while this glowing sun child is in the house. Anyway, they are formidable people, and they are, you know, any one of them could walk into this room. I imagine there's a couple Republicans in this room, but I guarantee you, if one of these Democrats that I know came in here, he could, you know, you'd be saying that guy's a heck of a guy, you know. I mean, Bill Clinton could turn a room faster than anybody I ever saw. He could just walk in and the room turned. It just swooned for him. That's talent. But Bob Dole was no slouch either. I was talking with some of his old cronies before about the women of a certain age just were all over Dole. They just couldn't keep their hands off him. Of course, he was wired together with chicken wire and chewing gum and everything. They just about killed him. And it didn't do much for Elizabeth's mood either. But they just loved him. And guys, you know, they were telling Bob Dole's latest joke for the next 3 years, you know. I mean, he was really, and he loved being that guy who turned the room. He loved it. He loved getting out and walking into some little store. You know, I think he was of that generation that wasn't really a TV politician at all. He was a Main Street guy, you know. He learned his ropes in Russell, Kansas, in Russell County, coming up as county attorney. I remember he used to, when he'd get a letter from somebody back in Kansas writing to protest something he'd said or some speech he'd made or some bill he'd sponsored, you know, they'd write him some angry letter, you know, raking him up and down for this action he'd taken or thing he'd said. He always saved those. He wouldn't let the staff answer those. And then some night when he's hanging around the Capitol, everybody else is gone. Dole is still there because he's got no other life, you know. And he's sitting around the Capitol office, and he'll get the telephone, and he'll dial up the fellow who wrote him the nasty letter. And he'll say, "Warren, Bob Dole. Listen, some damn fool wrote a letter and sent it in here and signed your name to it. I thought you'd want to know." He was, in my experience of all these guys, he was the quickest, you know, funniest. And I think he had a richly good time. You know, he'd stop in at 5 dinners a night. He never ate anything. But of course, he'd stop in, they'd put him right on, you know, and he'd make a few jokes and get out of there and go to the next dinner. He had a richly good time doing it. I never saw him happier. And when he was in private, he was even funnier. What It Takes, which Bill was so nice about that book, starts on a certain night 2 years before the election. And I had killed myself researching that day and night. I had Dole's whole schedule. I had talked to everybody he saw that day. I'd talked to his driver. I'd talked to the Capitol policeman. I had the whole thing wired. And so at a certain point, you know, a year later, 2 years later, I talked to Dole about it. Well, there'd been a lot of days under the bridge since then, by that time, and so I had to refresh Dole's memory about what Dole had done that day. And he said, at a certain point, he said, "Well, I don't know where I ended up that night." And I said, "Well, I do. You went to the dinner for the delegate from Guam, because Guam had 3 convention votes." And I said the honoree was the delegate from Guam, a fellow named Ben Blas. And it was absolutely clear from Dole's face that he wouldn't have known Ben Blas if he'd run over him with his Lincoln Town Car. And he said, without even a pause, he said, "How is old Ben?" Anyway, so let me return to this serious theme that I'm pursuing tonight. One of the interesting things about actually writing the story of the actual human who is actually running is that it may reconnect that person with his own story. Dole had buried that stuff. And then there it was in print. And he was the most surprised and delighted of any reader that I had. People came up to him in the Senate, guys he'd worked with for 20 years, 25 years. They said, I never knew this stuff about you, Bob. That stuff is amazing. You're an amazing man. I think he really enjoyed being reconnected with the young man he had been. And when he ran and got the nomination in '96, I think he was a much wholer, he had a fuller sense of himself. He had a full past to work with. Not that he ever quite managed to tell that story again, but he at least referred to it, and people came to know something about it, and he felt connected to that boy he had been. It was funny when he, after that race and when he got out of the Senate, he decided he was going to do his own book. And he called me up. I wasn't there at the time. He got the message tape, and he left me a message saying, "This is Bob Dole. Do you have anything about my life that I could use?" Which I didn't. If I knew anything, I put it in the book. That's why it's 1,000 pages and didn't sell any. Anyway, it was a privilege for me to get to know these guys. And I think it, in a funny way, it kind of helped them too. One of the reasons Bill mentioned that Joe Biden was here and said very nice things about the book. Joe Biden professed himself entirely surprised by how he came out in that book. He had no idea how he looked. One of the interesting things about doing that book, there were 6 candidates that I wrote their stories. And since I was kind of in their heads, I wasn't just writing about what they said, I was writing about what they thought. And since I was doing that, I kind of had to clear it with them. I kind of had to ask them, well, is this really what you were thinking? So I took every page about each guy and I sent it to them with great trepidation. And I explained to them that I didn't want them to be my editors, but if there was something wrong, if there was something that seemed wrong to them, I probably needed to know that. But the price of getting me to change anything was to tell me how it really was. So, some of them did it. I mean, Biden, for instance, we had to go through that thing. He went through every story in the book and made everyone richer. Bob Dole didn't have any problems with it except a couple of stupid jokes I'd made about Russell, which he didn't like them. So I took them out. I didn't care, because they were not about how the place really was. It was just about how people in Washington thought of the place. The interesting thing was the only one who actually wanted to lawyer every phrase in the book was Elizabeth Dole. And finally I said to her, well, Mrs. Dole, what do you think about the stuff about Bob? And she said, well, I think it's just wonderful. And I really do believe that, especially with regard to the early years, you are the reporter who's done the most fundamental research, and I'm so much looking forward to reading it. Which means that what she did was had the staff go through it and find everything that could be a problem. And that's the newer politician, That's the newer generation of politicians. We were talking at dinner tonight about our politicians less of size than they used to be, our candidates, our potential presidents. And I don't think they're any less smart. I don't think they're any less charming. I don't think they're any less educated or goodwill. But they're worried about every word that they utter now. There is no more having a talk with these people. They know that any talk could be on the web instantly and on TV 20 minutes after that and be chewed to death, and they chewed up with it. I mean, God knows John Kerry is living through that right now. So I think it's terrible for the country because for several reasons. Number one, we don't get any sense of who these guys are, so we can't write who they are. So people don't get any sense of who their candidates might be. Number two, a candidate can't try out an idea, explore things, talk about something that's not finished and is not reduced to its proper, 10-second soundbite. Number three, without these actual conversations with actual people, as they say in the ads, a politician never hears anything honest from one end of the month to the other. This is every president's problem. I mean, we wonder why they're so completely beholden to the polls. Well, it's because nobody ever tells them anything. They have no idea what's going on there. I guarantee you, right now, whatever you may think of the Bush administration, the White House is running like a top. And everybody who comes into Bush's office is delighted to be there, delighted to see him, happy to tell him what a splendid fellow he is. And they're all excited about the wonderful things they're doing for the country. And he hasn't heard any bad news in, I'd say, about 6 years now. His daddy had the same problem, and then we wonder why they're so cut off. Well, nobody talks to him like you and I can talk. And they can't afford to have such talk because they'll get killed. They'll be answering about it for the next 6 months. Anyway, that's a terrible problem, and when they make us the legislature of this country, we will remedy it. But I want to stop lecturing at this point and call for questions, and I want to tell folks that they can ask about anything. You could ask about baseball or Middle East politics or American politics or Bob Dole or anything you choose. So fire away. And I will, Bill asks me, this is being put out on streaming, what is it, a webcast or something? Streaming video. I don't exactly know what it is. I suspect it can be painful. But the microphone, if you have a question, a microphone will come to you, and you want to have it when you ask your question. Okay. Yes, sir. You in the front.
Could you make a distinction between working as a reporter for a daily newspaper or a magazine, which you have done, and working on the book, which you did without the kind of deadline pressure?
Well, there was a lot of deadline pressure. Did you all hear the question in the back? Did that work? Okay. There's always deadline pressure. I can make any project go until about 10 days after the deadline. Doesn't matter how simple the job is, I can make it hard. And I think any writer worth his salt can. A newspaper is actually much easier, and I'll tell you why. Not because there's a lack of deadline pressure. There's an absolute draconian deadline pressure, but you're coming out again the next day. So if you don't get it right, or if there's part of it that you couldn't write about because you didn't quite have it tied down, no problem. You're going to come out again tomorrow. A book is there forever. And if you make a mistake in a book, you live with it for the rest of your life. And believe me, there are people who come to your events to point it out to you. You know, you made their year. Magazine stuff is kind of neither here nor there. I mean, I lost money on every magazine story I ever did. Because you sit down at lunch with the lunch costs more than the story. You sit down at lunch with the editor of the mag and everybody, you know, I mean, there's just bun hummy heaped on the table. And they are very excited about this story, and they want you to do this story, and you want to do this story, and it's such a wonderful fellow and such a wonderful lunch, and you say yes. And they offer you what sounds like real money. But it's not real money. You know, let's say they're going to shoot the moon and they're offering you $10,000 for a magazine story. It sounds, you know, great. It's $10,000 for a magazine story. That's fantastic. But if it takes you 3 months to do the research for the magazine story, and then they want to mess around with it, and then it's another 2 months until it comes out, and then they want you to publicize it, you've worked a half a year for $10,000. Now, where I live, you can't do that. If you want to do it right, if you're one of these fellas, like there are some writers that I really, you know, in my next life I want to be them, because they can just write a little essay right from their armchair, and it looks like falling off a log. I mean, some of it's great, like Roy Blunt Jr. There is no magazine that doesn't have a Roy Blunt Jr. story in. You could probably make money. But me, I'm just a schlub. I have to go out there and go to the mama and go to the brothers and go to the teachers. And, you know, if I want to write a profile, I got to actually know who the guy is. So I lose. You know, I can't do it. I can't write for magazines anymore. The new magazines for me are documentary films, which are just cumbersome enough to give you enough time to learn something.
Talked about the expansion of 24-hour cable news and the contraction of print and journalism. Do you see any way to reverse that trend?
Well, I have a box of grenades in my garage. And, you know, I'm not exactly sure. I think that there's going to be serious print journalism, but it's going to be a luxury item. It's going to be for the hyper-educated and involved people. And it'll carry advertising that is aimed at an upper demographic. I don't know. You know, everybody in the business is trying to figure this out, and they're a lot smarter than I am. They don't have a single answer. We were talking at supper tonight about these stupid white guys who own newspapers. Geez, you know, dumb as a sack of rocks. They have the same problem as presidents in that they never get any real information, you know. Their problem is that they drive the Mercedes right from their enclosed and heated garage at home to their enclosed and heated garage under the newspaper. And so they didn't see anything, they didn't hear anything, nobody said anything. And so if they want to find out how are they doing, they have to convene a focus group. So they're all behind the one-way mirror, and the focus group convenes, and the moderator of the focus group says, well, what do you think of the paper? And the folks who are at the focus group, the subjects of the focus group, they say, well, you know, I was going to read the paper, but then, I remembered I had to mow my lawn, and I just ran out of time, and I never got back to it. So the stupid newspaper executives are behind the glass saying, oh my God, they don't have enough time to read the paper. Let's make it shorter. Let's just put a picture in or a graph instead of the story. And it's entirely the wrong message. What that actually means when the lady says, I picked up the paper and then I remembered I had to mow my lawn, was I looked at your stupid paper and there's nothing in there to read. She doesn't want to mow her lawn. If there was anything to read, she'd still be reading the paper. But there's nothing to read in it because they shortened it down and dumbed it down to the point where it's just a bad news capsule. You know, late. It's late as a news capsule. If they had an actual story about actual things, I'll read their paper. But right now it's not available. So does that answer your question? I figure they'll solve it. Those fellas will get it right. Any other questions?
Well, I have one. What part
Yes,
of
sir.
your life, or what have you done in your life that you are most pleased?
Other than being here tonight? Geez, that's a very interesting question. You know, I've been lucky straight along. I don't deserve any of the good things that happen to me, but nothing bad ever happens to me. I love newspapering. I had a great time doing magazines, even though I went slowly and genteelly broke. Book writing has been, you know, has had its ups and downs, but boy, when you hit with a book, like, for instance, I wrote a book about DiMaggio that people actually bought and read and cared about. It was astonishing. That was great. I don't know. You know, I guess the biggest, I mean, the thing that I'm probably happiest about is my daughter. But, you know, I'd have to bring her. Then you'd see. I don't know what to tell you about professional life. It's been so good that I figure I'm going to get hit by a bus tomorrow.
What will it take to be an effective leader of the United States and address the big issues of our day?
Where are you?
Back here.
I know that's back there somewhere, but thank you very much. What will it take to be the effective leader that we're all hunting for? Oh, man. Well, for one thing, you have to tell the truth relentlessly. You know, all politicians worry about being raked over the coals, as we were talking about before. But if you can convince people that you are telling it as you see it, I think people are so hungry for that at this point that they will follow you to the ends of the earth. You know, one of the things that you see when you go out in these presidential campaigns is how hungry people are to believe in somebody, that they might do some good, you know. And the American people are not as easy to mobilize as they were because of that shout fest formula where whatever you say, they'll bring in somebody to say exactly the opposite. But when you can get the American people together to do something, they cannot be stopped. It's the most remarkable country for getting things done that I think the world has ever seen. I have a confession to make in that George W. Bush is a friend of mine. But on the actual fact that all my friends are screw-ups, I have to tell you what I think was the worst thing he did. Iraq is bad enough, but the worst thing he did was in that moment after 9/11, when this country would have done anything. He didn't think big. He didn't say, all right, this is the moment to introduce 2 years of national service, whether it's in the Army or in the forests or in the cities. Or he didn't think of asking the American people for anything except to go to the mall, which was his actual suggestion. He could have turned this country in any direction that seemed to benefit the American way and America's goals, you know, the goals with which the nation was founded. Anything that struck a blow for liberty, everybody in the nation would have done. And he told us to go to the mall and act as if. That's small. So you have to tell the truth. You have to think big. And you have to be willing to spend all the goodwill that you won during the campaign. Let me tell you who else I have issues with. The list is long. Bill Clinton, for all his talent, would not spend a nickel of his own political capital to get anything done. He was so timorous and wanted to be liked by more and more and more people, you know, building up that approval rate. I mean, what's the difference, you know? This is like the question of what's the difference between having $100 million and having $200 million. What's the difference between having a 66% approval rate and a 68% approval rate? I don't see it. Anyway, Clinton ran on three things. This is actual fact. I'm the oldest guy in the room, so I can remember this. Clinton ran on the overarching idea of change. He ran on a middle-class tax cut, remember that? And universal health care. Well, he put Hillary in charge of universal health care, and she flamed out. The middle-class tax cut, he just forgot about that. He decided, well, no, maybe the deficit's more important. And change, the only thing he changed was his mind. He didn't do anything that he said. Reagan, who I voted against as an article of religion, was an honest bargain with the American people. He told the people what he was going to do. You know, he had 3 or 4 big, simple ideas. They were idiotic ideas, but they were his ideas, and we loved him for them because he actually got in there and did that. Clinton didn't do anything like that kind of honest bargain with the American people. So, to answer your question, or to make a stab at answering it, I think you have to be, you can get the American people to do something if you're honest with them, tell them what you're going to do. If they put you in office, do it. They'll follow you. They'll be happy to follow you. Sir. Madam.
Okay. I have a journalism question, actually, and that is that, you know, Bob Woodward, who just wrote a book about the Bush administration, people are saying a lot of things like, because he didn't drink the Kool-Aid on this book, he'll probably never be able to write another book again because he won't have the access. And I'm wondering, okay, well, you know, I guess what I was wondering was, you wrote this very large and very good and very truthful book, and I'm just wondering if you had difficulties since, or if you had difficulty, you know, in the immediate aftermath of the book, getting access.
I didn't have difficulty only because I didn't want to go back. I figured if I hadn't said what I meant to say about politics in the first 1,000 pages, there was no indication that I was going to get anywhere nearer to it in the second 1,000. So I wasn't asking for access. And I think Woodward won't have any problem at all getting access. First of all, administrations change. The next administration may think he was very wise to finally get off that Kool-Aid. And secondly, Woodward is a permanent Washington institution in a way that no administration is. You know, it's like Ben Bradley and Sally Quinn as host and hostess of the Capitol. It doesn't matter what administration is in, you still want to be invited to their party. And Washington has a kind of permanent set of actors, and they react either well or badly to each new incoming administration. So Woodward will be fine. Plus, Woodward has more money than God now. And anyways, he can't be a reporter because he's too famous. The story wherever he goes is that Bob Woodward is here. So he has that problem. But he's doing fine. I wouldn't, don't you lose a minute of sleep about Bob. Yes, sir, you've been very patient. Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody else get the microphone. Go ahead.
Yes, so why did you write the book, The 88 Campaign? In your own words, you said there was a billion words on Dole, and then it said during your research you found out that, it was an open fill, but that means you didn't know that before.
No, I didn't, but I knew that they weren't answering the question that I wanted answered. And I'll tell you exactly what the question was. I couldn't understand how normal people, or even a little better than normal people, could look like such dorks. You know, I couldn't understand how a guy could be so talented and so personally powerful that people thought he should be president. And then I look at him on the screen of the TV and I can't see anything. I couldn't understand what happens to these guys. I'll tell you literally what happened to me. I went to the playoff game between the Houston Astros and the New York Mets. And I saw George Bush throw out the first ball of the playoff game. Now, I happen to know that George Bush was a hell of a ball player. I'm talking about the elder George Bush, or as we say, Bush the better. I'm just kidding, actually. I like Junior. Anyway, Bush was captain of the Yale team, which was a team that went to the College World Series and won the College World Series. He was actually scouted and offered a contract by the Washington Senators. So I know he can play ball. And he gets up there. He looked terrible. He couldn't get the ball to home plate. It kind of dribbles in the dirt on its way to the catcher. It was embarrassing. And in fact, he was so embarrassed that he buried his face in both hands, and that was the picture that appeared at about, I'd say maybe 8 columns across the Houston Chronicle the next day. And I'm thinking, what happened to this guy? Is it something, you know, they're putting imbecile powder in the water? I just didn't know. Anyway, that's what I went out to find out, was what happened to the guys. And everything else I let go. I didn't know what the polls were saying. I didn't know what the ads were saying. I just didn't worry so much about that, except as they entered the candidates' lives. So that's what sent me out there. Good, you got it.
Thank you. In the book, you go into great detail about Joe Biden and why he ended up dropping out of the race because of the plagiarism scandals. And then I just heard recently he's thinking about running again.
He is running again.
He is running?
Yeah. We all, those of us who know and love Joe knew that he was running when the hair plugs took. You know, it's like Dole, you know. You call up one of your Dole friends and you say, is he running? He says, I saw him, his hair's black as night, you know. He's running, you know.
So my question is, how do you think the media will deal with those old plagiarism stories?
I think
News now?
they'll try to stick them on him again. But, you know, I don't think that they can't do that the whole campaign. The question is, can he get enough traction to get listened to for anything else? And I think he probably can. You know, anymore 1988 is ancient history. I do some talking at college campuses and such, and I'll say something about Iran-Contra or something. It is absolutely apparent to me that these children have never heard the words. They just don't know what I'm talking about. I might as well be talking Chinese. In fact, I'd have a better chance with Chinese. The Carter administration, they're not sure exactly what century that was in.
Mr. Cramer, thank you for coming to Lawrence.
It's my pleasure.
I've enjoyed the time we've spent together here tonight. I'm interested to learn what you feel the parallels might be between sports and politics. And one guess may be what you indicated toward the end of your, or maybe answering a question about the insulation between public and the politician, or the insulation between the fan and the sports icon. But that's just a guess. I would be curious to listen to how you can answer that.
Yeah. It's a good question, and one that I have often talked about. I think that they do have a lot of the same characteristics. And I'll tell you why I like to write about oversized sports heroes and oversized political candidates, is because they are all men. I say men advisedly because all the ones I've written about have been men. They are men who have bent their whole lives to doing this outsized thing, at which, 9 out of 10 of them will fail. And they bend their lives and the lives of their families into this, in the case of the presidency, one roll of the dice, where they're, more than likely to fail and be reviled for failing. And athletes, bend their whole lives to this blink of an eye, 10 years, 5 years, 8 years, 12 years, when they are at the peak of their physicality and can do this thing better than anyone else. And that kind of obsession and that kind of faith in yourself, ego strength, I call it, I'm interested in that. And I like to write about it. I think I understand something about it. They are alike also, as you mentioned, in their insulation. But the ball players are much worse. I think I said at dinner, and if I forgive me for repeating myself if others have heard this, but politicians we rank more or less with used car dealers. Sports heroes we adore. and raise them to the pantheon. But I can tell you that the political people, not just the candidates, but the operatives and advance guys and pollsters and ad guys and all the denizens of that political world are the most generous, decent. They're not all getting rich. They're killing themselves to do what they think is right. They help you just for nothing. They will help you do anything if it won't hurt them. They couldn't have been kinder to me. I cannot tell you the ignorance with which I started that book. Sports guys, on the other hand, have all got their palms out. What's in it for them? Can they have approval? You know, do they get a piece of this? You know, who's gonna write this? You know, they want to be paid to show up anywhere. I mean, I think I also mentioned earlier Bob Feller, who is a Hall of Fame pitcher for those of you who were born in Mongolia, wanted $200 for me to interview him. You know, $200. If he'd asked for $200,000, you know, okay, you know, maybe now we can talk. But $200, Bob Feller. It's just awful. Joe DiMaggio, about whom I wrote a serious book, was such a narrow, selfish, grasping man that it was really notable. I mean, he was one of a kind, even in the sports world. But that sports world does not make for generosity. And they are cut off. I'll tell you, you know, one of the sports ventures that I undertook was to write a story about Cal Ripken, who, as he was breaking the big consecutive games record for Sports Illustrated. I lost money on that too. And so I spent a couple of weeks in the Oriole locker room. And one of the perks of being an Oriole, of which there are many, is that all the magazines come to the locker room. I mean, all the magazines. And they're all stacked up in pristine rows, the new issue of this and that. And all of them untouched, except for two. Not, as you may imagine, Playboy and Penthouse. That is free and available, altogether too available for them to be reading about it. No, the two that were opened and, in fact, dog-eared were the DuPont Registry of Antique Automobiles and the DuPont Registry of Fine Homes. Those were the only two. That's what they're doing. Yes, sir.
You said that like journalists are like the basic keystone between politicians and society today.
I did?
Well,
sounds surprisingly smart for me.
You probably didn't say that. Sorry. Well, I think so. That journalists are pretty much the keystone between politicians and what society sees politicians as, or how they're portrayed. And you say that politicians have this big-time charm about them. Like, what percentage of journalists do you think are affected by that big-time charm?
All of them.
Politicians, really?
All of them, if they can get anywhere close to them. You know, Bush got this Bush. I mean, Bush the younger got a good 4-year ride out of just giving these guys nicknames. I mean, they didn't lay a glove on him for 4 years because they were not, you know, Fred Zimmerman. They were Ranger or Honcho. You know, them and the Prez, they had a thing together.
Sir, in your opinion, what is the main motivating factor for someone wanting to become president of the United States to start with? And if you had to guess, who do you think will be the nominees for president in 2008?
Well, let me take the last part first. What do I know? You know, I think that the Democrat will be the one that was in second place when Hillary flames out. I think the Republican will probably be McCain because the rest of the Republicans will all have killed each other. But my predictions are, you know, I'm always toast on those things. I think that what motivates these guys to run, there's two events in this cycle for candidates. One is to decide to run. And the second I consider more important, which is they get to the point where they think it's going to be them. It's got to be them. You know, they get a conviction about it. But I think when they start to run, it's like the brass ring. You know, it's like the thing they've been driving at their whole lives. And now is their chance. They can get the money. They've got this little window, you know, if this breaks right, and if, you know, if I can just get, you know, 20% in Iowa, I think I can do it. But that's different from what happens when they're in it. Because when they're in it and when people start to listen to them and when they start to hear themselves, and when they have to kind of reach into themselves and find out what it is that they meant to say if they ever got this chance, they get to the point where they think it's going to be them. It's got to be them. They're the one who is going to save this, you know, save the country from this and that and defeat that terrible idea out there. You know, maybe even do something proactively good. And at that point, their whole idea of themselves change. You notice so many of these guys, once they've run for president, even if they didn't get to be president, their whole lives are over. You know, Bob Dole leaves the Senate, Dick Gephardt leaves the House. Even Jesse Jackson, you know, who got that thing going in the middle of 1988, changed his life utterly because they're different now. They see themselves differently. What they say really matters. What they have lived through really meant something to them. It's really the most searing, life-changing experience you can have. And all of a sudden, you know, your old job seems small. You can do it with one hand behind your back, and anyways, doesn't mean anything if you do it. So, so many guys, you know, Al Gore is now pursuing his new life as a filmmaker and, you know, man about town. And Mike Dukakis ended up teaching in a second-rate college in Florida. And, you know, the examples are legion. It changes you. It's the biggest thing you can go through as a politician. And if you do get to that point where you think, I'm it, you know, I'm the guy, then your old life is toast.
More questions here.
Please. Go ahead.
Mr. Cramer, you've written about other subjects that are of no second importance to baseball and politics. You've written about war. And I was interested recently, there was a Harvard U.S. News and World Report poll asking American people, which leaders do you have the most faith and confidence in? The number one was military leaders, which I think is very interesting at this time in our history. And at the bottom were leaders of the press. I wonder if you might comment on maybe some of the military leaders that you've had some contact with and compare them to press, baseball, and political leaders.
That's interesting. You know, first of all, the first interesting fact that you mentioned is that Harvard has gone into the polling business. the search for truth has now been abandoned. We're just going to ask people what they think. The second interesting thing is about the military leaders. You know, I kind of trust them too, but I trust them to do what they meant to do, which is not about policy. They're there to execute policy. So I think that's why we trust them, is because you can't yell at a military leader, you're wrong, you're just a bleeding heart liberal, or you're just a, rabid, trickle-down conservative. They can't get into that thing. They aren't in that dogfight. So they're above the fray in a curious way. I think that military life is the worst preparation for politics that you could have. Colin Powell made a very smart decision to not run. I think he would have hated it. By the time you're I don't know how many stars he had, what was it, 16 or something? By the time you're a 3 or 4 star general, nobody has said no to you now for about 25 years. They say, yes, sir. And then you get out into politics, and the first time you say anything, something, non-controversial, like everybody should have health insurance, who's against it? Somebody will kill you for it. Socialized medicine, single-party payer, and you're the general, you're looking around like, wait a minute, how'd the enemy get behind me here? The enemy is on all sides. They can't maneuver. They can't maneuver. Ike, if he hadn't have got the nomination by acclamation in a simpler time, I think he would have had a miserable time. And I haven't seen a general since that I think could do that. Schwarzkopf was, toying with it. No.
Just one more question here.
Do you feel that our democracy is becoming more fragile and our voter apathy increasing because of the personality assassinations that occur on local and national elections? They don't talk about the issues. They're not polite to their opponents. They only try to assassinate the other one. Therefore, there's less voter interest and puts our democracy at greater risk.
I have the feeling you agree with those statements. Yeah, I mean, in general, I agree with them too. But let me just take up one word that you mentioned just by, it's kind of a reflex. They don't talk about the issues. I've been in the newspaper business and I've been in the, book magazine. You can't get anybody to stay awake for 40 seconds about the issues. If you want to have a serious discussion about, say, national health care policy or, elementary school class size or something like that, I don't think you can get the American voters to sit through it. It might be commendable for the news media to entertain such stuff and to do it, in some kind of organized. I don't think you're going to get a lot of readers or viewers. I think what people want is they don't mind honest disagreement, but they want people to say what they really believe, not prepared attack lines. They don't want to only know their candidates from attack ads. If in the absence of anybody writing who these people really are, or in the absence of you actually knowing them because you come from a little place, like for instance in Delaware, everybody knows Joe Biden because Delaware is only about the size of this campus. Then you know nothing about these guys except you know, he is alleged to have lied about this, he is alleged to have stolen that, he is alleged to have defrauded such and such. So no wonder you don't cotton to them, and no wonder you don't think much about the future of the country under his leadership. Yeah, I think what people really want is they want somebody they can feel. If, you know, let's say you and I were having a debate, we're running for the Senate, say, and we're having a debate, and I say, what's your name? Yeah. Bill. Bill, you know, I can't see how you got to the opinion that such and such and such and such. My own experience is that that never works. You know, and then I tell you what I really think. In other words, if we were arguing like we were next door neighbors, which could happen, I think people would respond to that. And in fact, it works very well, I think, for candidates to give their opponent some respect and to really ask for an explanation of how they got to their benighted views. I think it can be done. I don't think the issues are really, everybody talks about, well, let's talk about the issues. I don't think that's really what people want. What people want is they want to be able to feel that candidate and feel there's something honest coming out of it. All right, I think, I just wanted to thank you, before they kick me off the stage, thank you so much for coming out tonight. Thank you for listening to me and being so polite. I have never enjoyed my time more than when I'm in Kansas, and it's usually because the people are so nice. So thank you very much for proving it again.